And today, the coronavirus fight in New South Wales got very personal for its politicians. We've had 11 new infections in New South Wales over the past day. One of them, the state's Agriculture Minister, Adam Marshall, who was infected when he went to a post-budget dinner at the Strangers Dining Room in Parliament House.
No symptoms at this stage, and hopefully if I do develop them, they're relatively minor, but I feel pretty ordinary about everyone else that is going to be impacted by me testing positive, particularly given the nature of Parliament and the number of people that have been in the building due to budget week.
Now that's obviously caused all kinds of chaos, particularly at Parliament House. But let me quickly point out, by the way, Marshall said he doesn't actually feel sick. None of the nearly 50 people now infected in New South Wales are sick enough to be in intensive care. In fact, no one at all in Australia has died this year from community transmission of this virus. But people who were at that dinner have now been sent messages, isolate for 2 weeks, except, oddly enough, the Premier Gladys Berejiklian. She was good to go this morning after a quick test. The state's chief health officer was asked about this. I mean, was this one rule for politicians?
Mr. Chair, why is the Premier not being treated as a close contact, given other people in that room on Tuesday night are being treated as close contacts?
So I'll just talk about the general process we do. So what we do is we assess each venue. So not any venue is the same. It's the size of the venue, how you walk into that venue, who do you have to pass.
But you've just said that this is highly transmissible. There's entire floors of department buildings in Westfield Bondi Junction where everyone is considered a close contact. This is a room.
Yes, but the room is a large room.
I spoke a short while ago to Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell, reporting from quarantine himself after flying back from Britain, going half crazy in confinement. I asked, is this another case of one rule for the bosses, another for everyone else?
Well, I think you could draw that conclusion. I probably won't go as far as to say that, but I do question if Gladys Berejiklian's name was Josephine Blogs, how she would be treated in this instance. And I do note that I know of 4 or 5 people at least who've contacted me who were in the Strangers Dining Room, most of whom didn't have that much contact or weren't that near Adam Marshall, who'd been required to isolate for 14 days. And Gladys Berejiklian hasn't been required. And one of them reckons they were in the room less time than Gladys Berejiklian and not as close to Marshall as she was. So Gladys Berejiklian was only there for half an hour. But she saw him in question time and she saw him in the party room that day. So people will ask, and they should ask, because, you know, it has to be one rule for all of us or the whole system falls down.
Particularly when we're told this is a super highly infectious kind of menacing virus, and 30 seconds in someone's company and that will do it. Well, still, maybe the panic shouldn't be that great. But I do actually think that the Premier is still showing courage. I'd call it courage. She's still refusing to lock down Sydney as Victoria would lock down Melbourne after 11 more infections. Now, the Prime Minister was cheering her on this morning.
Very confident of the ability of the New South Wales government, which they've demonstrated time and again in dealing with these situations. I think the restrictions that they've put in place are understandable and common sense, and I commend Premier Berejiklian for resisting going into a full lockdown.
Now, Andrew Clennell, I think Berejiklian is right so far to trust the contact tracers to track down the people who are in this new outbreak. Almost every one of the new infections were of people already traced and in isolation, so not a harm to anyone. But I believe there's only one mystery case left to work out. But how close do you think the Premier is to changing her mind?
So I think yesterday she was very close and today she's not. It's all dependent on the case numbers, Andrew. And today there's less case numbers. So it's a maths game. If case numbers continue to decline, we won't see a lockdown. I hope they do, because even the restrictions are pretty awful. I know a lockdown's worse, but sometimes you think, would a 3 or 5 day lockdown help, stop us having these restrictions for so long? For example, none of us can go on school holidays, right? So, I think a lot of people would go, well, if you could do a 3 day lockdown over a weekend and then we could go on school holidays, why not, But I don't think that's what the health officials believe. Kerry Chant has said, the Chief Health Officer says, a 3-day lockdown is just not enough. So you'd have to go 7 to 14, and that's just too disruptive. So I guess Sydney-siders just have to ride it out. And the contact tracers so far seem to be doing, as you say, a good job. And the key is declining cases. We know when they go up exponentially, we're in terrible trouble. There's a lot of tests taking place. A lot of people are getting tested, and the cases are seen to be slowly going down. Fingers crossed. Those number of cases will decide the actions of the government.
Well, I think that's true, but I think people have really got to acknowledge here the leadership that Gladys Berejiklian is showing here, because if it does explode, she knows she's going to get in the neck, and people say, why didn't you shut down Sydney, blah, blah, blah. So it shows a courage that I wish more premiers had shown themselves. She's taking it on her shoulders, taking the risk. Good on her. So far it's working out. The vaccine rollout, though, Andrew, what can we say? I mean, it's still very slow. Every time we get an outbreak like this, people panic because not enough of us are vaccinated. And that seems partly because it now seems the government put far too many of its eggs in just a couple of vaccines, particularly the AstraZeneca one, which few people now seem to trust. I think that's, again, too panicky, but still there it is. How bad do you think this issue could get for the Morrison government?
I think it's the only thing that can defeat Scott Morrison, outbreaks and the slow pace of vaccination. Now, his hope is by the end of the year it'll be sorted, although he said to me when I interviewed him in Paris, there'll still be some bumps in the road. One of the reasons why we've got this much higher number of first doses than second doses is the 12-week gap with the AstraZeneca. So I guess the PM's hoping after that 12 weeks, a lot more people will be vaccinated. But that means in 12 weeks, we'll probably only have still 25 to 30% of the population vaccinated, even if we have most of the vulnerable ages. And that's probably just not good enough, frankly. So he's described a sprint towards the end of the year. He needs to rely on it. I know anecdotally people are getting annoyed with him when there are restrictions, lockdowns, they can't go on holidays. Their attention goes often to the vaccination program and Scott Morrison. So to me, he's been flying pretty high in the polls, despite what news poll says. The internal polling says different. But this issue is the Achilles heel of the government, and he needs to be on guard for it. That's why he's put a 3-star general in charge. But I think you're right, there were some mistakes made early on.
Yeah, I think they need to now focus their rhetoric in protecting the vulnerable rather than protecting everyone, just to have an immediate success, because the key here is stopping people from dying, not from getting the sniffles. And so far, this outbreak hasn't killed anyone at all. The rise of Barnaby Joyce, elected the new Nationals leader this week in a surprise move, and now the new Deputy Prime Minister. Labor first thought, it seemed to me, well, great, we're going to attack him as an insult to women, you know, they hate him, and it's a sign of the government being so unstable. It doesn't seem to have worked out for Labor. Why would that be?
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's held his nerve, Barnaby. In question time, he just made sure he answered everything very calmly and just wore all the hits. And the fact he didn't fire up on it and threw a bit back at elbow, the fact that they just couldn't get any momentum with it meant they turned back to Morrison. So that was intriguing to me. Both sides will be watching the polling in relation to this move and whether it shifts anything. You may find just as many you get a few women who peel off the coalition because of Barnaby Joyce, who will be replaced by some people in the regions who like Barnaby Joyce. It may sort of balance itself out. But I also think that Scott Morrison going the G7 probably was the final straw that killed Michael McCormack's leadership. That week of question times with McCormack sort of bumbling around was enough for his colleagues to decide we just need a better performer than this.
Yes, I'm afraid he's a very nice guy, but Labor wasn't scared of him, and that's always a bad sign. Andrew Clennell, thank you very much for your time.